Hello, and welcome to the February 20th, 2019 edition of Shrewsbury Matters, a monthly show that presents a different perspective on the town's politics and problems. My name is John Lukács. Today I'll be talking about some of the issues with the town manager's just released 2020 financial plan, which contains his estimated revenue projections and recommended spending plans for Shrewsbury's next fiscal year. Before I get to that, however, I want to give some updates on recent news items in town. First, on the continuing effort by town officials to downplay the town's serious and ongoing water quality and unaccounted water problems. The latest example is another so-called news article in the Community Advocate, one dated February 1st. I say so-called news report because the Community Advocate is not a real newspaper in the true sense of the word. It is notorious for presenting one-sided articles that always speak favorably about Shrewsbury town officials and their actions. Its articles almost never present opposing viewpoints on an issue, and it refuses to print letters that criticize Shrewsbury town officials. The article in question was yet another one of the town's water quality, another one on the town's water quality problems, and saying that the residents should just be patient about the problem. Well, the residents have been patient for quite a long time now. And you remember, this problem has been around for many years. But town officials did nothing for several years before finally deciding to build a new water treatment plant. They then told residents that the water quality problems would be resolved once the new water treatment plant was built. Well, the new plant was completed last October, and there are still significant quality problems. So what did they do? In December, they had an article printed in the paper. They gave a, interview or whatever, and they said, oh, the problems would clear up by this June. But now they have realized that that was too optimistic. And also since I commented about the fact that some of the information they had in that article was incorrect. So what did they do? Well, they arranged with the Community Advocate to print this additional lengthy article on February 1st. And some of the comments in that article contradicted earlier articles. For example, one comment was that he added, quote, he added that the new biological system doesn't want to attach itself to the substance already in the pipes. As a result, old sediment is breaking off and dissipating over time. Well, guess what? In an earlier news article, he said just the opposite. He said that because the new biological system, the chlorine that they were using in the new biological system, the new setup, was reacting with the sediment that was in the pipeline, that was the reason why the problem would go away. You can't have it both ways. It's completely inconsistent. Let me just make sure I have my. By the way, and of course there are other things that can be challenged as well. I just want to make one other comment about the article, and that is I had to laugh when the article said that Shrewsbury's new water treatment plant, quote, is the largest biological treatment plant west of the Mississippi River. Really? So Shrewsbury is now west of the Mississippi River. I didn't know the whole town had moved out west. Sadly, this is typical of the poor editorial controls at the Community Advocate. But again, the Community Advocate is not really a real newspaper. So it's not surprising that it has so many errors and one-sided articles. Bottom line, regardless of what town officials promise, some Shrewsbury residents will continue to have water problems, especially during periods of extended drought. You can take that to the bank. So, my second update is on a subject I discussed at last month's show, and that was the new stormwater management fees that all property owners will begin paying this July. If you recall, there were some public hearings. The last one was in January, where people came in and asked why this was necessary and all that kind of stuff. And the fee on that is going to be a minimum of $90 per residential owner, at least. Most people will only be $90, at least for the first year or two. But at the public hearing, it was stated that Shrewsbury had one of the highest, if not the highest, population densities among all towns in Massachusetts, excluding cities, of course. They used the number of a 99% density number. So Shrewsbury has a very high population density, yet our town officials continue to recommend and approve measures that increase the potential number of housing units. And by that I mean, as opposed to individual sites, allowing, with our weak zoning regulations, allowing people to build two and even one duplex and even two duplexes on what was once had one house on it, properties like that because of our weak zoning regulations, or in the bigger cases where they created the Lakeway District, which allows mixed development, and over half of a property can be developed, of a commercial property, which was once restricted to commercial property. Now over half of the property can be used for residential development, typically apartments, high-density apartments. Same is true for the Route 20 overlay district that they created. The potential build-out on those properties is huge, and yet the town officials went ahead with that. So this is very bad. But equally bad is that town officials, our state senator and our state representative, have done nothing to point out Shrewsbury's extremely high population density, this high density number, to state officials, in order to hopefully obtain some kind of special relief from the requirements of Mass General Law 40B, the Affordable Housing Statute. Anyone who looks at Shrewsbury's situation will immediately see why Shrewsbury should be given relief from 40B. For example, our zoning bylaws are among the least restrictive in the state. Second, our minimum residential lot sizes are only 1/4 acre in many sections of town and 1/2 acres in the other sections. Meanwhile, other towns have 1/2 acre, 1 acre, and even 2 acre minimum lot sizes. So they're much less dense. And that was those were the towns that the 40B was supposedly directed at. People who had this exclusionary snob zoning, which Shrewsbury doesn't have. Another area is that Shrewsbury has one of the lowest percentages of land that's zoned commercial in the town compared to other towns. And the recent adoption of the mixed-use zoning in the Lakeway and Route 20 districts has reduced the potential effective commercial properties percentage-wise to less than 10%, far less than most other towns. So we're seeing our commercial property shrink. The residential areas are very densely populated, and yet we're still subject to 40B. Why aren't our town officials, making an issue out of this to our state representative, our state senator, and trying to get some kind of an exemption for Shrewsbury? Given these facts, it is clear that Shrewsbury has never used zoning to restrict affordable housing, so it should not be subject to 40B. So why aren't these officials making this case to state government and even requesting an outright exemption from 40B for Shrewsbury? Why not? So anyway, after those two updates, let me go to the main topic of today's show, which is on the just released town budget, released Friday, February 8th by the town manager. So I want to point out a few things. First of all, since taking over last year, the new town manager made some changes. He's made some additional major changes in the format and the organization of his financial plan. And this is worrisome, as it makes it more difficult to make direct comparisons to prior year budget projections, and in some cases it doesn't make it clear how things have changed. In other words, if you're changing the way a budget is presented, most companies will say you're going to have to provide footnotes and indicate that there's been a change in the way you've accounted for something. If you've moved a major expense or revenue item from one category to another category, you have to footnote that and identify that. In some cases, that hasn't been done, or at least it isn't clear. Now, I will say that In addition to that, I would also point out that it adds a lot of unnecessary verbiage, pulling out, including in there things about the selectmen's policies, things like that. That could have been either just referenced to another town document that would be on the website, or at the very least, put it in the appendix at the end. Instead, you have to read through all this excess verbiage in order to get to the meat of the plan. At the same time, in the past, some of the departments would provide verbiage explaining their needs and why they're asking for budget increases, etc. That's not in the current plan. So again, it's added unnecessary verbiage and eliminated some useful discussion on some of the departmental budgets. Now, I haven't had a chance to review it in detail, but I have already found some problems and misleading exhibits. So, first of all, I would like to point out that in prior budgets, the town manager's financial plan would show his recommended budget for the school department and then show what the school department's, the school committee's recommended budget was. In this case, I couldn't find it, at least based on the major exhibits. So for example, the difference between the town manager's proposed FY 2020 school budget number is $66.3 million, but the school department proposed, as reported on the front page of the Shrewsbury Chronicle dated February 15th, that its budget, its recommendation was $67.1 million. That difference is over $800,000. In prior years, the town manager always alerted people to these kinds of differences. Why not this year? Oh, by the way, I would refer to that school budget number as the so-called school budget. Why do I say so-called? Because in most organizations, their total budget means all of the revenues and spending of the organization. But this is not true about the school budget. The town manager's exhibits say that the reported school budget is only slightly more than 50% of the total town budget. This reporting allows school officials to continuously argue that residents aren't supporting the school system adequately. And specifically, page 9 of the town manager's financial plan has a pie chart showing that the school department is only 50.8% of the total shown. Oh yes, there is a footnote showing that a separate admin and finance line includes some educational expenses, but there are many other expenses in other lines that directly benefit the schools. So the problem is that this 50% number doesn't include millions of spending on behalf of the schools by other departments. This is spending by other departments that directly benefit the schools but are not counted as part of the school budget. If they were, the total school budget would represent at least 75% or even 80% of the town's total operating budget, depending upon how it is calculated. But it's at least 75%. That's 50% more than what's in the school budget that's reported by the school department and the school committee. The reason the school budget is not presented this way is clear. If it were, school officials would not be able to criticize residents for not supporting the school system when the school system already receives such a high percentage of the town's available resources. Given the later than usual issuance of the town manager's plan compared to prior years, I only had time to identify a few more potential problems. Here is one example. Despite prior years' discussions about segregating the budgets of the water system and the sewer system in order to improve accountability and transparency of those systems, which, by the way, are funded by water fees and sewer fees, and don't get funding from the water department. Certainly doesn't get any funding from the tax levy. Okay, so despite them saying they were going to segregate those, they really haven't done it. They really haven't done it yet. It's still confusing. In fact, in some respects, the 2020 plan document makes things more confusing, or at least apparently more confusing. The numbers don't really seem to make any sense. For example, on page 43 of the town manager's financial plan, which, by the way, if you go down through several layers of the town's web page, instead of it being on the home page, hey, by the way, folks, here's a new 2020 financial plan from the town manager, and putting that on the home page, the news section, it's buried somewhere down where you may or may not find it. So anyway, on page 43 of that financial plan, it shows water fees from fiscal 16 through 18 actuals, and then fiscal year 19 budget and fiscal year 20 recommended. And if we could put up that slide. So if you look at the year-to-year changes, they're quite significant, and they are not explained. So for example, you see a big increase between fiscal year 17 actual and fiscal year 18 actual. Then you see a big drop of $500,000 between fiscal year 18, or 400 and something thousand dollars between fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19. And then between fiscal year 19 budget and fiscal year 20 recommended, you see an increase of about $1.5 million. Why are these large swings? In other words, if water revenues, water fees, make up the bulk of the money going into, the revenues for the water system. So you would think that there would be increases, or if there were decreases, they would only be very slight. There should have been a significant increase in fiscal year 19, because in fiscal year 19, there was a big increase in the rates, if you recall. There was a big discussion, a lot of meetings last year, and the selectmen finally decided to raise the rates substantially, effective last July 1st. Well, if the rates went up, it stands to reason that the revenues from those increased fees would also go up, and yet this number shows it going down. Now, it's possible that somehow they put some of that money, increased revenue, into the water systems improvement account. But again, if you're talking about fees, revenues from water fees, that should show up on the water fee line. And then if you want to say, hey, some of that money is being allocated to that water systems improvement account, you ought to explain it. Let me just make sure So let me just say, as far as those kinds of numbers, they just don't seem to make sense on the surface. Now, perhaps those numbers and those changes can all be explained, but my point is that the large year-to-year changes and the difference with his fiscal year 2019 estimate were not explained in his plan package. And when I say his fiscal year 2019 estimate, I am referring to the water rate study he did and the recommendation for water rates that was updated as of April 12th, 2018 by the town manager. In that, he said that the proposed rates would result in total water rate revenue of $5,370,000. That's page 7 of that water rate study. Which, by the way, I can't find under the Water and Sewer Department. They have a list of different kinds of reports and studies, etc., including water rate studies. And yet the last document I can find about water studies is from 2016, when in fact they had a consultant study in November of 2018, and then they had another, the town manager did his own study in April of, the consultant study was November of 2017, then the town manager did his own study in April of 2018. And yet they're not there, so you can't, it's hard to compare. But if you go and look at that, if you're able to find it, you'll see that $5.4 million of water rate revenues. And yet, what he's showing here for fiscal year 19 is only $4.3 million. So there's another problem. And I just want to make one additional point, and that is that rather than make water department revenues more transparent, he appears to have made them less transparent and more confusing. Okay, so here's one more example, though, from page 57 of the town manager's fiscal year 2020 financial plan. He has changed the classification of the annual payments that the town receives from Selco's cable and light operations, which together total $1,038,000. He's reclassified those to the reduced levy category, the same as for free cash. Now, I don't see how that makes sense. And in fact, I believe most accountants, almost all accountants in fact, would say that this classification change is wrong. Why? Because the Selco payments are more like a payment in lieu of taxes, like what they call pilot payments that nonprofit organizations and other companies that don't have to pay taxes will pay to a town in lieu of property taxes. So it's more like that than they are like free cash. So they should not be lumped in with free cash. But even if the town manager can somehow justify this classification change, he should have included his justification, his rationale, in his financial plan document, right in the document. Why did you make this change? Changing the classification of accounts or making other major changes in the way data is presented compared to prior year financial plans should not be made without highlighting the changes and explaining why the changes were made. Another oddity that I found is that for some reason he's now put the library, which used to be its own department with its own section, he's putting that under human services. Well, human services, I don't quite follow, In other words, when you could argue that when they plow my street, that's a human service, right? I don't understand why he had to put that in under, why he's trying to move it in under another category. It should be its own major category. So anyway, hopefully the town manager will be able to answer these questions and resolve these problems at the upcoming Finance Committee hearings on his financial plan. The first hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, February 21st at 7 p.m. And I plan to discuss the town manager's financial plan in more detail after I've heard what the Finance Committee has to say and after I've had more of a chance to study what's in his financial plan. And I plan to do that on my March show. There was one other little interesting oddity that I wanted to cover. I'm not sure I can find it right now. Well, let's see if I missed it somehow. No, and that's the library thing. Now, anyway, again, the point being is, rather than make the review of the financial plan data more transparent and easier to follow, in effect, it's become more difficult. And is that at the urging of the selectmen wanting him to change this, or was this his idea? It seems like there are some kinks, to say the least, that need to be worked out. So now there's one final topic I want to cover today, and that is the real need for fresh voices to be elected town meeting members. We're now in a period when interested residents of the town can go to town hall, go to the town clerk's office, and take out nomination papers for a town meeting. I say, and I would encourage people to do that. The town needs independent-minded town meeting members who are not closely related or connected to the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and other town boards, as so many current town meeting members are. I can't tell you how many town meeting members are also selectmen, immediate family members of selectmen, selectmen, former selectmen, finance committee members, former finance committee members, school committee members, former school committee members, planning board members, former planning members, and it goes on, zoning board of appeals, other committees, master plan committees, those kinds of things. They all form this tight-knit group, and it's not just those current and former members of those committees and boards. it's the immediate family members. If you were to just go through that and then add to that all of the town employees who are also town meeting members, you probably talking about one third of town meeting is made up of those types of individuals, and in most cases that becomes a working majority because we have so many people, town meeting members, who don't even bother to show up. So basically, these people just go along with whatever the selectmen say. Now, town meeting is supposed to be an independent legislative body, not a rubber stamp for town officials. You know, I wish I had more time, and maybe in a future show I'll do, is I'll go through and explain, take the town bylaws and what created our representative town meeting, the rules by which it was the act of, I think, 1954, 1955 that created representative town meeting form of government in Shrewsbury. Go through those in the town bylaws, and you look at what it says about town meeting, okay, and how town meeting is the legislative body of the town. It should be having serious debates about whatever the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen are presenting to them. Instead, they act as though they're just a rubber stamp for whatever the selectmen want to put before them. That is not the way. And if we want to have a good representative government in this town, and we want to see this town, be excellent in its government, then people are going to have to take a more active role in that government, because I'm telling you right now, you see the kinds of things that are happening with, as I said, with these mixed-use developments where they've taken commercial property and they're going to turn over 50% or more of that property for more high-density residential development. What is that going to do to our finances over the next 5 and 10 years? It's going to make things a lot worse, because as even the members of the Finance Committee have admitted, and even the selectmen, I believe, at one time, they might have changed their minds since then, but there have been studies showing that, you need a strong commercial base in a town if you want to have fiscal stability. And the reason for that is that commercial properties generate a lot more in the way of revenue to the town from property taxes than they cost the town in services, whereas residential properties are exactly the reverse. So if you have such a, Shrewsbury's percentage is almost 90% now, and with these mixed-use developments, it's going to go over 90% effectively of residential areas. And so that means that there's too big an imbalance, and long term, the town is going to be continue to struggle with its financial needs, and there's no refuting that, and yet they continue to look at the short-term benefits of these developments as opposed to the long-term costs. It's unfortunate. So please, I encourage people, get out there, and you can take out papers, go to town hall, take out papers. You only need 10 signatures of registered voters. You turn that back in. I'd probably get 15 just to make sure there aren't someone who, isn't. They don't certify 1 or 2. Get it back to the town clerk, and you're all set. And then if you want to, you can go out and campaign or not. So anyway, that's why we need it. And I want to thank you all for listening. See you next month.